The way 21st century Western Christians use the Old Testament is straight up cultural appropriation.
Instead of focusing on one or two issues at great length, like I usually do, I'm going to try and address as many as the false claims in this video as I can, so let's get started. First, the woman in the video claims that God didn't care about anybody other than Israel in the Old Testament, and that the idea of God loving everybody doesn't show up until the New Testament. This is wrong. First, God says in Genesis 12, with his call to Abraham, that all the families of earth will be blessed through him, and this is the first inkling we get in the Old Testament of how God plans to use Israel to bring the world back to him. We are told in Exodus 19, 5-6, that God intends for Israel to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, that all the earth is his. But what does it mean to be a kingdom of priests? Well, we're told in Isaiah 49 that God says to Israel, I will make you as a light for the nations, and that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Israel was to perform the role of priesthood to the entire world. Though God chose to operate through the people of a single nation, his goal has always been global. I will conclude this point by mentioning Psalm 117, Psalm 67, and Psalm 96, all of which include a call to all people of all nations to call upon God. This is a very common theme throughout the Psalms. Moving on to the claim that the Israelites were polytheistic, there are a lot of problems with this claim. First, the divisions of polytheism and monotheism are modern classifications, and to try to apply them to ancient cultures is anachronistic to say the least. Nonetheless, let's look at this question. What do we mean by polytheistic? If by polytheistic we mean that the Israelites thought that there was any other beings besides Yahweh which was comparable to him, this claim is just strictly false. The entire Old Testament speaks regularly about how there is no God like him and how none are beside him, etc. However, if by polytheistic you mean that there are other powerful spiritual beings besides Yahweh, then yes, they were in this sense, but this is something that Christians still believe today, and it's a stretch to call this polytheism. Confusion comes here because the word in Hebrew that is translated God in English is the Hebrew word Elohim. While Elohim is often used as a name for Yahweh, this is not its only meaning. Elohim was essentially a word that referenced a being who resided in the spiritual realm. Thus, a dead prophet, or what we would call angels, could reasonably be called Elohim in the Old Testament. So when we see in the Old Testament the gods of Egypt mentioned, we need to understand the word being used in a more nuanced sense. Mike Heiser is an Old Testament scholar who wrote on this topic at length, and I suggest his work on this matter. The person in this video says that Christians are culturally appropriating the Old Testament, and this is the most ridiculous claim I've heard. The early Christians were Jews who wanted everybody to recognize their God and follow their scriptures. They believed that salvation was for all people, for all nations, and they didn't gatekeep their holy text. Not only that, through Christ we become God's people. This is something Paul, a Jewish Pharisee, explains in both Romans and Galatians. Through Christ, we are counted among the offspring of Abraham, and there no longer is Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. We're all one in Christ. It can't be cultural appropriation because that is our culture now. The same God that said to Israel, you are my people, says to the non-Jewish world, in Christ, you can be my people too. You can be adopted into my family. And in being adopted into that family, I get full inheritance rights.